13-line ground squirrels are famous for their remarkable ability to be able to hibernate without eating or drinking for months.
Even if you give them water during hibernation, they will not actually touch it. They just don't want to drink at all. So this is telling us that they don't feel thirsty.
And the more I started to learn about this water problem, I realized it was really interesting that no one had seemingly looked into this.
So that opened the new avenue for the research to identify mechanism of thirst suppression through entire hibernation. The big goal of our lab is to understand how hibernation works. We still don't know cellular, molecular, and circuitry mechanisms that these animals employ to survive prolonged period of starvation, water deprivation, and cold exposure. This can tell us a lot about animal physiology, including how human body operates.
Their brains are not so different from our own, although we might like to think so.
So in my lab, we use 13-line ground squirrels to understand neurophysiology of hibernation. Because they're small size, we can keep them in our specialized facility called hibernaculum, where we can try to recreate seasonal changes, and they will stay in hibernation until winter is over.
During hibernation, we keep the lights off, so we use red light so they're not disturbed. Squirrels are curled up, and their body temperature can be as cold as a little bit above freezing.
And during this period of time, they go into torpor. Torpor is not sleep. It's a state of suspended animation. But every 2-3 weeks, these animals will wake up and they will increase their body temperature. They become fully active, and we call this interbout arousal.
So this is a pattern that goes on and off for several months where they're alternating between torpor and interbout arousal. So we know that they're in a state of water loss, but we think that perhaps what's happening is that these massive fat stores help them to produce metabolic water, which is just enough to survive.
But even if you give them water during hibernation, they will not actually touch it.
So how do they not feel thirsty? At the very beginning, when I was starting out, there were so many different possibilities and it felt overwhelming, but it ended up taking the form of a checklist. So when squirrels are not hibernating, the kidneys are responsible for the first detection of a change in hydration. This is going to trigger the production of this hormone angiotensin II, along with its sidekick aldosterone, which can stimulate sodium appetite. These hormones signal the subfornical organ and vascular organ of the lamina terminalis that it's time to drink water.
So we decided first to look at the blood and see if they have angiotensin in the circulation. And to our surprise, they double and triple concentration of angiotensin in the blood.
Almost yelling to the brain, we should do something, we need to drink more water. It caused us to ask, is there any sort of consequence to these hormones? Are they doing anything? We know that aldosterone can stimulate sodium appetite.
So we offer them water, similar concentration as a seawater. They're getting crazy about it, and they drink it until they just run out.
And this suggests that they're detecting aldosterone and responding with sodium appetite, but they're not detecting angiotensin and responding with thirst.
The next was to check if neurons that detect angiotensin are they actually sensitive to this hormone.
And I found that there was the same amount of receptor expression in active and interbout arousal squirrels, suggesting that was not where the source of thirst inhibition was.
So we were a little bit puzzled, but we're very excited. And then we decided to look at, are these neurons actually capable to transmit information from angiotensin?
I used immunohistochemistry to check neuronal activity. There was a reduction in the number of neurons recently activated. So this suggested to me that both brain regions responding to thirst and coordinating thirst in the brain are suppressed during hibernation. So this was another encouragement. And then lastly, we wanted to see if their baseline activity and the properties of these neurons had changed. So I took neurons out of the brain to actually record the electrical properties, and we found that they were very suppressed.
So despite that they're sensitive to angiotensin, they cannot transmit this information downstream to different brain regions. That's how they don't feel thirsty in the middle of hibernation.
There are a lot of interesting questions to look into next.
We looked only at the response to angiotensin, but there are other hormones, for example, responsible for hunger drive, and this may be a general mechanism to reduce activity of these neurons.
But I think that this is a really elegant way that the squirrels could tune their thirst sensitivity without completely shutting it off.
They can tell us a lot about flexibility of the sensory system, and we also have the sensory system. This also tells us about how our body functions at the normal conditions. And I think this is actually not a joke, but we can employ knowledge from 13-line ground squirrels if we want to put astronauts in the suspended animation. How we can employ similar strategies, maybe not at the same extent as ground squirrels, but this will help us to go and explore space.